that I wanted to call out. Obviously, there's a lot of different areas within data and big data as well that you may run into and that you hear about. But day in and day out, these are three of the biggest things I wanted to call out today that I hear and I see in my role. And then just for context, you should know that it's important probably for you to know that my background is that I've been working in the database, BI, data warehouse, big data field, that whole arena for it's 20 years now, I believe. Man, I'm feeling old. But at the same time, what's interesting about that is to sort of watch the changes and be part of that as not just moving into cloud environments, but different ways of working with data and being able to bring in different data sets. And big data platforms help us to be able to do that and analyze data in ways that we couldn't before. And so that's why we're really happy to have Hortonworks here with us today. We're going to introduce you to the Hortonworks data platform within Azure. So just to come back now to these three trends, the first one on the left is the modern data warehouse. And this is where Hadoop in particular, which is, if we haven't already said so, Hortonworks is a provider of Hadoop distribution, and that's what you're going to have some demos on in just a bit. And Hadoop, as a processing engine and as a data platform, has many different capabilities that you can start to adapt and adopt into your existing data environments. And we see a lot of customers who have existing enterprise data warehouses start to modernize that environment by doing things like using Hadoop as an optimized engine for ELT or ETL. And that's because you can leverage things like MapReduce, and you can leverage Hive and other sort of technologies to work with larger sets of less structured data than you do in an enterprise data warehouse. Another interesting one is the ability to have faster ingest of data. So that whole ETL, sort of your nightly feeding of your Teradata or your SQL Server is, the requirements for business are changing, and the competitive nature of business, in where big data helps in that, is that you can also now not just analyze more data, but ingest data faster and more data. And so we see technologies come on line in our customers, from the perspective of seeing things like a Storm is a great example in this area. We see, message buses being leveraged, such as, Kafka. And there are, of course, Microsoft and Azure specific versions of those technologies too, around event hubs and stream analytics and whatnot. But what's interesting that we're going to introduce you in this series is, as we bring in guest chefs for this series, is that the ISV marketplace within Azure opens up an entire world of non-Microsoft's open source and other technologies that you can leverage to build out these solutions. And that's why it's exciting in the role that I'm in within Microsoft and working with customers, and how Azure changes that sort of perspective that we take at Microsoft, where if you want to build your big data infrastructure on Azure using Hortonworks data platform with all the different parts of the Apache Hadoop ecosystem, we absolutely support that and have that capability there. So the last one, if you could just go back to it for 1 second on that slide. I know I'm kind of I'm going a little bit slow, but there is one other thing I wanted to say on that, is that the whole idea of these hybrid architectures is another very important piece of the modern data warehouse, where by hybrid I'm talking about hybrid on-prem and in the cloud, as well as a polyglot persistence sort of architecture, such that you can leverage, Hadoop for specific analytical workloads. But you can also leverage SQL Server for other workloads. And like Joan said, we're going to have DataStax coming on to present their data platform as well, and that's a NoSQL-based, Cassandra-based data platform that also has other capabilities. And if you leverage that sort of capability of the best storage engine for the best purpose, now you have a complete set of tools and technologies that you can run in the cloud on Azure in different managed sort of environments. So the second important trend is the data lake, and this is one that's becoming very, very popular. Let's just stay on that slide if you would. the data lake is. You
get my drift. We gotta.
No, I'm sorry. I'm going to go real fast. Believe me, I'm going to put it into fourth gear. I promise you. But I want to make sure I touch on the data lake, because this is a very important trend where. The concept here is such that you would take data, usually data files, you drop those into a massively distributed file system that can do things like you'll hear from Saptech that Hadoop leverages, which is the idea of splitting up data across distributed nodes and having data locality to process that data. Data lake is very important in that idea of being able to drop data, essentially exhaust data or data that hadn't been leveraged within your enterprise data warehouse before. And last but not least, I want to make sure I mention advanced analytics. Very, very, very big and important topic around data science and being able to then perform algorithms and advanced analytics on that data that you are putting in the lake, that you are now leveraging in your modern data warehouse, that may not fit specifically into a canonical model, but you may be able to find some patterns in that data through regression algorithms and other techniques that a data scientist would use. Okay, now let's move on to the next slide. So those are three important trends that we see that we're going to cover in this series. And when you're moving into cloud for this environment, three things that I want to call out very important that this enables. One is scale. So the cloud enables that elasticity of scale such that you can spin up and spin down. Not necessarily spin up and spin down, but you can grow and you can shrink your environment based upon the usage of your service. And why that's important is that eliminates that long time engineering perspective and architecture perspective we've had of architecting for the worst case scenario in sort of over provisioning environments. And so the cloud in Azure enable for that. And the speed of deployment is something that you would see if you were to do something after this series and after this specific call today. If you were to want to go and spin up the Hortonworks data platform within Azure, you can see how quick and easy that is to spin that up and to pause that, so you're not being charged for consumption of that VM. And that's a huge advantage of running these environments in Azure and in the cloud. And last but not least, I already mentioned the polyglot environments where we have a whole set of offerings in the ISV marketplace. And let's go to the next slide because this is a good segue into that. So the idea of the polyglot environment where, like I mentioned before, where you're leveraging the different storage engines, different processing engines for the different needs, from streaming to NoSQL for key values to Hive for a Hadoop-based data warehouse, all enabled within the ISV marketplace. Let's go to that next slide here, where I can introduce you to the ISV marketplace within Azure if you haven't before. And I'm not seeing this slide move on, so hopefully it's not just that I'm frozen on my side. Is the slide deck able to advance?
Yeah, it does not seem to be moving.
The slide deck has frozen. Well, while we sort of work out the technical difficulties of, there we go. There's advanced technologies like PowerPoints. Perfect. Okay, good. So here we go. So what I wanted to say was that the tool within Azure that enables you to spin up and spin down and build these VM-based environments within infrastructure as a service in Azure is called the Azure Marketplace. And a lot of times, I'll refer to it as the ISV Marketplace, but essentially what this is this is where our partners and software vendors can publish their tools within Azure. So you can go there and you can pick one from a menu of many of thousands of different offerings, and you can spin those up and you can run your business on those. There's also abilities like I believe Hortonworks has this too, where you can have sandboxes where you can test and you can try out the environment and then pause it, spin it down. And that's the whole elasticity and the way that you can control costs, because these environments within Azure become that sort of pay-as-you-go, or that sort of consumption-based costing of a utility, essentially is what it is. So it's a very interesting way to build out a solution environments. Okay, last slide that I have here. In particular, the next slide, what you're going to see is that we are talking today specifically about big data. So we have Saptech from Hortonworks. And so what I have on this slide is just a quick couple of screenshots that I took of showing you that there's a number of different big data specific offerings. I mentioned a few things like around Kafka and Hadoop and Cassandra, all the different sort of environments that you'd want to find in there are available to you within the marketplace. On the right-hand side of the slide is just a quick screenshot of how easy it is to spin up an environment like the Hortonworks data platform. This is some of the configuration. You just type in, fill in those questions there on the guide, and then it'll spin up a Hortonworks VM for you. And this is the nature of what the marketplace provides for you within Azure. All right, so without further ado, let's move on to the next slide. And I think we're going to have a little bit of a level setting here from Saptek around Hortonworks Data Platform, and then he's going to take it from there. So with that, I'm going to give it to our guest chef for today's Azure Cafe for Big Data and Hadoop, and that is Saptek Sen from Hortonworks. Take it away.
Okay, Saptek, are you there? I know he's on the West Coast.
Guys?
There you are.
Yeah, you can hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you had gotten muted.
Okay, no problem. So, so welcome to the main course, so to say. So, as I go through the next few slides, actually quite a few slides, I'll go really fast because for the lack of time. But if there are questions or anything like that, feel free to kind of ping us, and I'll try my best to kind of dive in. So I work for a company called Hortonworks, which was founded about 4 years back. And but Hadoop, we created Hadoop, and Hadoop is 10 years old. You might ask, how is that possible? Because this Brady bunch, so to say, when they created Hadoop, they worked for a company called Yahoo. And as Hadoop gained steam and became popular and started getting popular in many enterprises, Yahoo spun it out as a separate company. At that point, I used to work for Microsoft. So I worked for Microsoft for 13 years, and interesting bit of tidbit. I was at the conference being a demo monkey for one of our execs, Microsoft execs, when Hortonworks was announced by Yahoo. So, but now we are a public company. We have over 1,000 employees. We have over 2,000 partners. And we are, we have offices all around the globe. We kind of lead the charter and roadmap around Hadoop in deep collaboration with market leaders like Microsoft. And actually, the partnership with Microsoft and Hortonworks is very deep, and it started from day one. Our company started, so we have been working super closely with Microsoft on engineering to make HD Insight available on Azure, and also make sure we have HDP or Hortonworks Data Platform available on Windows and so on. And not just on Azure and Windows platform, we work with Microsoft so that some of the innovation that comes out from Microsoft research and Microsoft product teams gets kind of integrated with in the open source community. And I'm going to talk in a few slides a little bit on that. But just to take a step back, I mean, today's enterprise, a very common scenario is Internet of Things. And Internet of Things, you can think about any kind of endpoints which is generating a lot of data. For example, mobile phones, sensor devices on the ocean floor, cars running around the streets, or cars or trucks going about their journeys in the streets. All these items can become source of data. Even traffic lights are sources of data. So, and they together create a tremendous amount of data, right? And not just the volume and the velocity of the data that's kind of, different from before, but how we handle that data and what kind of analytics and how we do on that data is slightly different from before. If you think about the pattern of analytics that you want to do on this, you want to do different kinds of analytics when the data is in motion. You want to filter, you want to structure, you want to alert on the data in motion. And then you want to do batch analytics, interactive analytics, dashboarding on the data at rest. So accordingly, Hortonworks data platform provides for both. Let's go to the next slide. Next, yeah. So here are some of the very common use cases. A slide back. Real-time cybersecurity. In fact, we work very closely with the digital cybercrime unit at Microsoft on exactly this kind of use cases. Smart manufacturing. 70% of the manufacturers are our customers, right? Connected and autonomous cars, even future farming. Of course, things like recommendation engines that you see on sites like, Barnes & Noble and Amazon.com and so on, right? So these are all use cases for modern data applications, which HDF, which is Hortonworks Data Flow, and HDP, which is the Hortonworks Data Platform supports. Next slide. Now, specifically around Hortonworks Data Flow, there's often a very common scenario where data needs to flow in two different directions. Typically, you would think that the endpoints generate data and they needs to be ingested and collated and so on, right? So that's data flowing into your data lake. But there are many scenarios which requires data and events to flow the other way around as well. For example, in case we had a project where we worked with USGS, or United States Geological Survey, out in California, where they were running a pilot where they distributed small seismic sensors of the size of a cigarette pack, which you could harness in your garage, and they would detect seismic activity from all homes all around the city and so on, and send it back to detect impending earthquake. But there were a lot of false alerts, because as trucks passed by during commute time or whatnot, that generated false alerts. So they had a machine learning model which kind of made sure that it could filter out those false alerts. So they could send back those threshold values back to the devices so that they didn't send alerts or events which were not useful, which were clearly not stemming from geological sources, so to say. So that's why we need data flowing in both sides, and not just that. Data flows around different kind of connections, so there are different kind of latencies. So we need a data infrastructure which can handle that, and Hortonworks Data Flow does that. Just to put it in a very, just to explain it very quickly, means we obviously handle a lot more scenarios, and I'll point you to resources which you can look at to know more. Next slide. So one of the things that we did when we were developing Hortonworks Data Flow is make it very simple to use. Actually, we got inspired by some of the Microsoft Office tools. If you look at our interface, it looks very much like Visio. And the reason is this tool first started getting developed at NSA, National Security Agencies. And national security agencies had a very complex data flow. To capture all that, they came up with a Visio worksheet, right, which captured how data flew from various kind of components across this very complex organization. Now, they had a question for themselves. How about we could control this entire data flow? We could compose it. We can develop it from this interface. And that's the genesis of Hortonworks data flow. It started getting developed by NSA engineers. Later, they open sourced and a company was formed around it, and Hortonworks acquired that company, and that's why it looks so much like just a visual workflow, and it can be as complex as you want. It can really capture your organizational workflows. Next slide. Now, looking at Hortonworks data platform, Hortonworks, as you know, Hadoop came from a couple of white papers around Google file system and the MapReduce paper that came out. Now, so initially, Hadoop was developed only for batch analytics, but pretty soon the core engineers for Hadoop at Yahoo realized that, hey, there are many other applications which required to scale out, which needs to be distributed. And why don't we build a platform which can support all these different kind of applications, whether they are batch, whether they're interactive, whether they want to do machine learning, whether they want to do search, whether they want to do real time. So they developed Yarn, and we started working as a company. Hortonworks started working on Yarn from day one of our company. So about 3 years back, we released Yarn, and now it's really, really mature. Since then, we also realized that there are other services for a data platform which is required across all these applications, like governance, security, operations. So we developed all these various kind of services which can be shared irrespective of your data application, like security, operations, governance, and so on, and deployment, of course, deployment management across all these applications. Next slide. Now, we do all this work on the data platform out in open and deeply partnering with the key players in the enterprise data platform space, like Microsoft. For example, we collaborated with Microsoft on a project called Project Stinger to make Hive, which is the de facto SQL standard for big data, really, really fast. So Microsoft contributed back some of their crown jewels on how to implement a super performant indexing engine back to the open source and with collaboration with us. So we work very closely with Microsoft and other such leaders in this space. And we also employ the most committers compared to any other company who commit the software back into open source. So we really, really influence the Hadoop roadmap. Let's move on. Next slide. So as Mark was alluding to, the key aspect of adoption of the big data platform is flexibility. Many of our competitors think that it's for enterprise adoption, they are going to go in and rip and replace the existing infrastructure with their newfangled solution. But it doesn't work that way. It's required, first of all, to integrate with the existing infrastructure. And not just that, we have to provide flexibility in terms of where they want to run their infrastructure. And that's something which Microsoft and Hortonworks really, really agree on. And if you look at the offerings from Microsoft and Hortonworks, they both speak to this flexibility, right? So whether you are on-prem or whether you are in the cloud, you have a solution which looks very, very similar, which is kind of symmetrical in experience. And that gives the customers the choice in making the decisions. Wherever their data is, they can bring up this infrastructure and so on. So for on-prem, we have obviously HDP. So we have HDP on Linux and Windows. And we are the only company which provides Hadoop on Windows. We also have HDP on appliance. So again, we work very closely with Microsoft to provide Hadoop as part of the Microsoft's data appliance, right? The same thing goes for cloud. On the cloud, again, we have, as we said, Microsoft has a PaaS offering, or platform as a service offering around Hadoop, which is called HD Insight, and this has been co-engineered by Microsoft and Hortonworks. And not just that, we provide all these choices of HDP on IaaS, Hortonworks Sandbox for dev and test kind of scenarios, and so on. We also provide HDP on other kind of virtualized environments like OpenStack, Docker, you name it. Next slide. So here are some of the specific choices on the Microsoft platform. Of course, we have HDP Sandbox on Marketplace, and I'm going to actually show a very short demo there using the Sandbox. We have HDP Azure Infrastructure as a Service on Marketplace, so you can bring up true blue HDP on Azure. You have HDP Platform as a Service, which is HD Insight, where it's a managed service. You don't need to worry about configuration, managing it. It's very simple to use. You can really quickly bring up Hadoop infrastructure on Azure. And then we have a solution called CloudBreak, which lets you bring up auto-scaling HDP on Azure or in other Docker containers, as well as other cloud platforms. Next slide. So let's talk about some of the use cases very quickly. Next slide. Now, typically, how many of our customers adopt Hadoop is as a cost optimization driver, right? So first of all, archive data from expensive enterprise data warehouse. Enterprise data warehouse appliances are very mature and very performant. They're just great platforms, but they're also very expensive. So for the customers to get the best value, oftentimes they move off their warm data into a Hadoop-based data warehouse, as opposed to keeping it into their proprietary enterprise data warehouse. Many of our customers also, who are kind of dipping their toes into the world of Hadoop, use Hadoop as a distributed ETL platform, right? They have to process through a lot of data and extract and structure the key artifacts from this unstructured data and load it into a RDBMS or a data warehouse, right? So they use Hadoop in that process as a distributed ETL platform. And even enriching the value of your enterprise data warehouse. I'll give an example. With Microsoft's data appliance, they have a technology called Polybase, which lets you have the SQL Server data warehouse and a Hadoop data warehouse side by side, and you can run the same T-SQL query using Polybase, which can join data from both these sources, right? Next. So here is a case study, and we have many case studies across many industries. So go check out the Hortonworks.com website, and you'll find those. But here is examples where, and in this case, it's TrueCar, and TrueCar started 12-month process before their IPO, where they grew from 6 nodes to kind of 60 nodes and 2 petabytes of data, right? And then they went from a storage cost which was $19 per gigabyte to 12 cents per gigabyte. And one of the execs actually commented that we addressed our data platform capabilities strategically as a precursor to IPO. So HDD was kind of a key thing which enabled their IPO. So that's quite a testament. Next slide. So here's some common use cases for Hortonworks data flow, which is also known as Apache NiFi. As we said, all the different pieces of the data platform we work on are completely open source. So their open source name is Apache NiFi. So for predictive analytics, for compliance, for IoT optimization, fraud detection, big data ingest, and value resources, right? And just anecdotally, I was just other day, I was talking to one of our consultants who works on many of the strategic projects with our customers. He says that almost 90% of his time is figured on any big data project is to figure out how to ingest all this data. And we have observed this pattern forever, means even before our company was formed, even when we were in Yahoo, that big data ingest is a huge area of concern, right? And that's where Hortonworks data flow can really add value. Next slide. Next. Next slide. Yeah. So again, Yarn is the architectural center for the Hadoop platform or the big data platform, and HD Insight is squarely based on Yarn. Yarn provides, by the way, Yarn stands for yet another resource negotiator, and what it does is it allows multi-tenancy, it allows efficient allocation of resources, and by resources I mean this is storage, this is compute, this is memory, and this is network, right, across various applications or various types of applications. Next slide. Yeah. So again, anecdotally, let me tell you a story. Before joining Hortonworks, as I mentioned, I used to work at Microsoft, and one of my jobs at Microsoft was in the high performance computing team. So when we went with and tried implementing large clusters with customers, let's say a customer bought a 100-node cluster, and then we went, we tested that and we benchmarked that with the customer to make sure that our software worked really well on that cluster. But we went back after a week and we saw they have broken down that 100-node cluster into 10-node clusters, and it's because they didn't have a good way to implement multi-tenancy, and it has changed since then. Now you can very well do that, and kind of because that 100-node cluster has been paid by many departments, and each department wants to be assured that when their jobs run, they get the resources, right? And so it's very important to implement those kind of SLAs with policies. which you can express in your resource scheduling platform. And Yarn lets you do that. And it also enables next generations of workloads like interactive SQL, streaming, ML. So whether you are running Spark, whether you are running Storm, whether you are running Hive, it's all running on Yarn. Next slide. Apache Ambari is also a very key piece of the infrastructure. Again, I'll say Microsoft System Center is also a great inspiration from this. So we quickly understood how important it is to have a single pane of glass to manage, monitor, deploy enterprise infrastructure from a single pane of glass, right? So Apache Ambari provides you that single pane of glass for all the open source components that you see, whether you're trying to manage, monitor, implement HBase or Storm or Spark or Apache NiFi, you have a unified place to deploy, manage, monitor, operate from. So, and I'm going to give you a glimpse of Ambari as I move into my demo part. I know I'm kind of running out of time. Next slide. So this is a reference architecture for our IoT application. So as you can see, there are 4 essential parts, right? One is the source data, where the data is getting generated from. This could be server logs, application logs, sensors, firewall logs, you name it. It also can be other kind of traditional data sources like CRM, ERP, and so on. And then we have ingest section where we ingest the data, we clean the data, we filter the data. Then we have a batch section where we idempotently store the data. And then there's an interactive section where you, or sometimes it's also called the speed layer, where you are interactively querying the data and doing visualization, doing dashboards and whatnot. And then there are the BI tools or alerting tools and dashboards themselves, right? Those are the third-party tools that kind of integrate with the platform. Now, Hortonworks data platform provides everything that you need for high-speed data ingest, for real-time, and for interactive. Let me actually show you this in action. If I can kind of take control of the screen and project my screen. Let's see. No. Okay, great.
You should have it now.
Okay, so let me know if you see my screen. So in the meantime, are there any questions? Are there on the chat or any other?
Zaptec, are you there?
Yes, I'm there. So can you see my screen?
No, I cannot.
Let me know when you see my
Yeah, it
screen.
looks like it's loading.
It's loading
We can see it now.
Yep.
I got it. Thank you.
Great. So here what we are looking at is the Azure portal, of course, and the marketplace section of Azure portal. So if you search for Hortonworks, you see the top 3 options. If you see the Hortonworks Sandbox 2.4 and the Hortonworks Data Platform. And not just that, if you again, of course, just search for HD Insight, you also find HD Insight, right? So in all these cases, you can very easily set up Hadoop on your on Azure. So let me show you the the Hortonworks sandbox, right? Which is great for, it is a single node cluster. It's often called a pseudo cluster. What that lets you do is lets you kick the tires of Hadoop and all the various components we briefly touched on, and kind of build a prototype application, right? So if you say create, you can choose the settings from here. In basically 5 steps, you can create a fully working cluster, which I've already done here. So once the cluster is running, you can see that it has an IP address, and it has a resource group. So if you want to quickly delete the cluster, the best way to do it is just delete the resource group. So it will take out all the resources which has been allocated on Azure. And once you have that, then you can access things like Ambari running, right? So this is Ambari running on the same IP address on Azure that is here. So you can look at the public IP. I just copy pasted it here and went to port 8080 and then logged in. And so this is my view, the Ambari view. Now, Ambari lets you deploy, as I said, with add service. If you want to deploy any of the additional components, as you can see, I've already kind of deployed most of the components. And that it's the same case for your real life Hadoop cluster or even HD Insight cluster, right? You have HDFS, MapReduce, Hive, HBase, Spark, Zeppelin, and NiFi, which is also known as Hortonworks Dataflow, and so on. But let me go a step further and actually show you a workflow in NiFi. So as you saw, I've kind of deployed NiFi on my sandbox. And once you do that, you see a screen like this, right? And if you go to port 9090, which is again the default port for NiFi, and the easiest way to start composing a data flow is just pull one of these processors. Now it comes with close to 120 processors, and it's very quickly growing. Actually, there's a new version of NiFi which goes up to 200 processors, and you can do everything from execute a SQL statement, connect to a Flume sync, connect to a HTTP endpoint, and there's a connect to MongoDB or store data in MongoDB. You name it. So there's a lot of things you can do straight out of the box. Not just that, this is an extensible platform, so you can create your new processors. Now, once you have, say, a processor, I'll say a get file processor, right? Sorry. Get file processor. I have a get file processor. And then let's say I drag another processor, which is put file. Right. Now, if I want to connect between the two, I just need to do this, and I can then set up the configure the connections as well, right? So, and then I can configure this as to what's the input directory and so on. So these are all, again, different for different processors. These are processor-specific properties that you can set. And once you do that and hit the run button, it will start running that workflow. It's as simple as that. But let me actually go into a slightly more representative of real-life workflow. So here is a workflow which is slightly more complex. So what this one does is, let me first kind of quickly give an overview. So it connects to Twitter using the Twitter's REST API and start collecting tweets. Now, after tweets land into the system, into Hortonworks Dataflow, using this processor, I process the JSON and pull out key attributes from that from tweets, right? Once I do that, with this processor right here, I'm filtering those tweets. For say, there are some tweets which are kind of empty tweets, or which contains words or keywords which we don't care about. We can filter out those kind of tweets using this processor. Once that happens, we are kind of going on two different routes. First of all, we are putting those tweets into Solr. Solr is again a search engine and an indexing engine built on top of HTTP. Again, it's fully open source, and it's putting those on Solr. And on the other hand, I'm sending these tweets to another processor where I'm replacing the text and structuring the text in a way so that I can load those tweets into a Hive table. Now, Hive table, you can think of it like open source data warehouse built on Hadoop, right? And once it kind of I do that, I'm merging the content. So by merging the content, what I mean is I'm batching up several tweets into one file or one message, so to say, because I don't want to connect to Hive and insert records one by one. I want to wait till I say I get 50 records and then do a batch insert. That way I get much better performance, and I'm not kind of inundating the network. At that point, I'm putting it into HDFS. HDFS is the Hadoop data file system, or Hadoop distributed file system. You can also put it in, say, Azure Blob Store, Azure Data Lake, you name it, right, for your data. And once it lands on HDFS or Azure Data Lake or Azure Blob Store, then Hive can then query. Using Hive, I can query that data, right? I'm also putting it as a file, as a plain text file into a file system for whatever purpose, right? Now, here you see a connection where, for whatever reason, if the connectivity between all these processors and HDFS is broken or whatever, for whatever reason, it knows to kind of retry several times, right, till it can successfully persist the data into HDFS. Now, let me dive in, a little bit deeper. So here you can see that here are my consumer keys and my secrets and my access tokens for the Twitter REST API. And here are the terms I want to filter on. So I'm getting tweets which has all the stock symbols referred in it. So Apple, Oracle, Google, Microsoft, Dell, and so on. And this could be any keywords, right? And if I start running this, for example, if I just select this and press run here, you'll see it will start kind of querying. Now, I can also, what I can do is I can unselect any specific processor and press a play here, then all the processors will start running. You can see it's already, there are data which is coming in, right? And to kind of take a look as to what is coming in, I can go here. So I can see here I received some of the data. I say view. So this is the view. And I say formatted. So you see it's bringing in some CNBC tweet, CNBC fast money final trade. And this is all happening in real time on the Azure platform with very little development and configuration. It's basically drag and drop, right? I didn't have to do anything here, right? So this is the tweet that is coming in. It refers the Apple symbol, which was one of our filtered keyword. and that's why you see that, right? Now, if we go back, you see that now it's in the next step it has pulled out some key attribute. I can see at this stage what's going on, right? So I see all the attributes that has been modified. So you see that these are the custom attributes I had set. So this is the whole message. There wasn't any hashtags. This is the Twitter handle. And what the reason I kind of pull out these attributes from the JSON message is because I want to update this into the Hive table so that it gives me a better way to query that data, the time, and so on, right? And the Twitter user, his full name essentially, and so this is the handle, and this is his full name, and this is the unique ID, right? Now, what's also interesting is that here you see there has been 222 messages which has come in, but the out messages has only been 20. That's because it's kind of batching it, right? So it's batching it and sending the same amount of data, but in bigger messages with multiple records in them. So I can, in the real time, I can also see a dashboard. This dashboard was again very simply built using something called Banana. Banana is a dashboarding solution on Solar, and again, it's showing, for example, here word cloud of all the from the tweets, right? So here are all the different languages you see. So a lot of English and Italian language tweets for some reason, and then Russians and so on. One German tweet. It's a very customizable dashboard to do this.
Now, this is great. This looks really good. Any questions? Pop them into the window. Anything else, Septek? Because we wanted Marty to kind of bring in the dessert.
Okay, absolutely. So yeah, so this was the entree.
Here's a question. Here's a question for you. Can we use HDF NIFI for setting up the real-time streaming workflows or batch only?
No, you can also set up real-time streaming workflows. Again, when you say real-time, everybody has a different definition in terms of latencies, how low your latencies you want it to be, but it can be real-time. I was doing the batching here on purpose, just for scalability purpose. Yeah, absolutely. You can streaming from sensor data. You can also tie in with other streaming technologies like Kafka and Storm with HDF NiFi. HDF or NiFi also provides great auditability and management of the workflow. So some of the components in this workflow could be things like Kafka and Storm if you want even better latencies.
Good. Thank you. All right. Any other questions? Marty, you want to take over control and do the slides, or you want me to?
Sure. How can I get control here?
Just share the desktop. Do you want me to do it?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's drop down to your slides. Here you go. Let me know if you can see it. Can you see my slides?
Not yet. Okay, here we go. All right, so today's dessert will be short and very sweet, just as a dessert should be. So on this slide, we have Septek's contact information along with mine. You can let us know if you have questions. There's a lot of helpful links. Just really want to point out the sandbox there, the second link down. We also have a lab that you can take. That's okay, Joan. You can move right along. If you want to take a lab with Hortonworks, we have a number of superhuman labs up at this tryazuremarketplace.com. So if you take the lab, you can actually win a free drone. Or moving along, if you want to take a facilitated version of the lab, we are having a series of virtual labs coming up where a facilitator from some of our top Azure Marketplace ISVs are going to lead these. And you can see on May the 5th, we have Hortonworks, and we have 4 series going on. So stay tuned for the registration links for that. Okay, move on. One of our other top, in a completely different category, our top solution vendors on the Azure Marketplace is Barracuda, the security vendor. They have a roadshow coming up, so if that's something of interest to you, you can see the dates on the right-hand side, and you can see the reg link, and we will send this out to you in the follow-up if you're interested. And then the final slide, I think we just wanted to circle back and remind you that the Azure Marketplace is a great place to go and look for solutions for Azure for your business. And so thanks very much. So Joan, any parting comments?
No, we welcome your feedback. You can send a note back to us via the registration site. And we'll welcome also if you have any favorites that you'd like to get deep dives and more added to the cafe. Could be big data, could be security. We're looking forward to hearing back from you, our community, and we'll see you again on April 27th at same time, 12 o'clock Eastern Time. And please share your friends. Let everyone know that this marketplace is here for you. And we welcome any feedback. And thanks again, and have a great day.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.